Leadership Preparation Webinar Series, Transformational Leadership, Applying Turbulence Theory to Educational Leadership in Challenging Times, Part 2. The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement is comprised of an executive director reporting to the assistant state superintendent, coordinators for school improvement, academic improvement, and leadership development, as well as leadership specialists. Our office has three main goals: fostering the growth of effective leaders, ensuring valid and reliable evaluations, and raising the quality of education. We provide targeted professional learning experiences and resources to equip current and future leaders with the skills and knowledge required for successful school and district leadership. We oversee the development and implementation of Maryland's teacher and principal evaluation system. Training, guidance, and support is provided to local school systems in the implementation of fair and valid evaluations. Lastly, we provide customized professional learning experiences and support informed by data and grounded in effective practices to improve school performance. To earn continuing professional development credit, in order to receive 1 credit, you must view 5 webinars, including Part 1 and Part 2. Additionally, you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to receive 2 CPD credits, you must watch all the webinars in the series, including Part 1 and Part 2. Then you will complete 3 hours of experiences per webinar to include any pre-work, participant guides with the webinar, and extension activities. In order to submit your materials, please complete the Google form found in the description below the video. Let's meet the presenter, Stephen J. Gross, Professor Emeritus of Educational Leadership at Temple University and Founding Director Emeritus of the New Deal Democratic Ethical Educational Leadership.
Source material for this webinar is the book, Applying Turbulence Theory to Educational Leadership in Challenging Times, a Case-Based Approach. Expectations and Logistics. Here's how to engage in the learning process in Part 2 of this webinar. First, appreciate the need to emphasize education for democratic citizenship in response to heightened turbulence. Second, appreciate the connections throughout the webinar to various PSEL standards, as noted. 3, deepen your understanding of the challenges facing teachers during times of heightened turbulence. 4, apply the 5-step process to authentic case of turbulence through guided practice. 5, extend your understanding of the 5-step process for applying turbulence theory through independent practice with your own experience with heightened turbulence. On the right-hand side, you'll see the following resource materials that are available to you, along with a link that will get you to their location, and you can reach them at that link. So, Applying Turbulence Theory Part 2 includes these 2 sections. First, specific ideas in a season of crisis and opportunity for educational leaders. And second, application, trying out a case yourself through guided practice. So the whole idea here is to give you, in the first part that we recorded earlier, the context of turbulence, theoretical ideas of what turbulence theory is, its 4 levels of turbulence, from light to moderate to severe to extreme, the 3 drivers of turbulence, positionality, cascading, and stability, and my suggestion of the 5-step process that will take you from saying what's going on here to having concrete steps to respond. The whole idea is this: turbulence is something that is going to be part of your lives, personally part of your lives, professionally part of your lives, throughout. And there's some ways that people respond to turbulence, often, too often, I would say. It's a question of fear and how to control too much. My response is it's probably more beneficial to you and those who depend upon you to learn how to work with the turbulence. Sometimes, believe it or not, to actually learn how to heighten the turbulence to create real innovation. In this part, we're going to look at some ideas to respond to the crisis and opportunity of our times. And the times are clearly the impact of the coronavirus and the search for racial justice happening in our schools right now, in our communities right now, in our nation, and around the world right now. The second thing is to give you guided practice to work on a real case so that we can learn step by step, because what we're trying to do is help you to create what I would say a new habit of mind. And just like anything else you're trying to learn, there's no other way to do it but to work on this systematically and practice until it's comfortable for you, until it really is a habit of mind. So it's a kind of protocol that you and your colleagues can work on and agree to use throughout as you strive to work with the turbulence that's part of the school environment. So in this section, we're going to look at ideas of a season of crisis and opportunity for educational leaders. And the asterisks, just like in the first part of this webinar, relate to the PSEL standards, in this case, numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, that this webinar relates to. What we teach is a question that's come to mind as I look through our lives in schools in the United States and around the world. I think the top priority is this: we need to raise the next generation that can sustain and improve upon our democratic society. What does that mean? We have to have an emphasis on social justice, on social responsibility, on community, on values, on transformation, and find exemplars that actually help us teach what this really means. How can we focus the key events today and help students understand, both intellectually and even emotionally, what's going on in the world in a way that gives them a sense of controlling their ideas, organizing the ideas, researching their ideas, and being able to see perspective in a way that we don't really have right now? If we're to really raise the next generation to sustain a democratic society, how do we give students those tools? And I think it is going to require us to re-examine our curriculum and reprioritize. This means, to me, prioritizing the social studies. But look what's happened to the social studies over the last 20 years. I mean, there was a time when history, geography, and courses in high school called such things as problems of democracy were very much common, were typical. In other words, yes, you're a citizen. You're born here, you're a citizen. You go through the citizenship process. If you've been an immigrant here, fine. But there's more to it than just having the label of citizen. Is how to be an active citizen, understanding what our Constitution is, understanding what our history has been about in a deep way, understanding what our geography kind of tells us about our society, understanding something of economics, so that what? When you become a citizen, you have to make decisions such as voting and who to support and who to work for, and perhaps run for office oneself. We have the requisite knowledge and the skills, including study, research, writing, persuading, organizing, debating, and each of those, working with our fellow citizens, being able to understand that our experience isn't the only experience, and to reach out and see in a democratic society how we work with people. These are skills that I think the pandemic and the search for racial justice have really taught me matter more now than ever. They always mattered, but they matter more now than ever. It includes critical thinking skills and an understanding of propaganda. We're being faced with a deluge of propaganda from every direction we can imagine, both domestically produced and coming from abroad. It's probably not going to stop, and we probably shouldn't count on organizations beyond ourselves to sort of weed it out and filter it out so that we'll never be exposed. What we can do is have the tools, each of us, and as a group, to be able to say, is this fact-based? Where is this information coming from? What are they trying to prove? Do they prove their case? So that being a citizen in a democracy means having all of those skills. It is an active process. It's not just a label you slap on yourself and say, we're done. We can never be done in a democratic society. We have to have a deep understanding of our history in this area, especially in the area of race. We can stand the truth, but we can't bear anymore our myths that pose as facts. Now, here's one great illustration of this approach, and it's called How Coronavirus Crisis Offers a Glimpse of What Poor Black Communities Feel Every Day by Dawn Miller. This is something that she reported on the PBS NewsHour on June 4th, 2020. I'll read you just a little bit of it. How Coronavirus Crisis Offers a Glimpse of What Poor Black Communities Feel Every Day. And this relates to PSEL Standard Number 3, Equity and Cultural Responsiveness. When I was a columnist, Dawn Turner says, for the Chicago Tribune, I often wrote about race and poor African American communities. Many times, well-meaning white readers would ask me, What can I do? I want you to know that this pandemic has afforded you a vantage point like none other. This is your opportunity to know what people who live in poor communities face and feel every day, long before COVID. I want you to remember what it feels like to stand in long lines to enter stores, because in poor Black communities, some merchants, fearing theft from a few bad apples, have long restricted the number of people they allow in at one time. And those plexiglass dividers that protect store workers now, well, their bulletproof cousins have been mounted in stores in Black communities for ages. I want you to remember the knot of anxiety you feel wondering whether there will be enough eggs or meat or even toilet paper on store shelves. Poor people living in food deserts face scarcity all the time. I want you to remember the unease of walking past boarded up businesses and jogging down barren streets, because that's what poor Black people who live in blighted communities experience every day. I want you to remember what it feels like to have a hole up in your house, because the whole world beyond your door is dangerous and filled with people who could cost you your life. I want you to remember what it feels like to lose your job and not only be stripped of vital income and all that entails, but of purpose and those social connections that motivate and inspire us. I want you to remember how it feels to stand in line to ask for a handout, and how you may worry people will ask you, how did you get yourself into this situation? If you take away nothing else from this pandemic, I want you to remember how powerless and hopeless and disaffected this moment has rendered you. I want you to realize that for poor Black people, this is not a moment. This pandemic offers even a smidgen of empathy. Then maybe you understand why people might rise up in rage. So this is what I would consider a serious opportunity for us to reflect. Turbulence theory, one of the main drivers is positionality. Listen to yourself and your own situation, but imagine the positionality of somebody who might have an experience very much different from yours. Your experience in COVID-19, according to Dawn Miller, and I completely subscribe to her point of view, can give us that ability to not really be another person. We can't do this, but try hard to shift our emphasis away from our narrow selves into somebody else's situation. And how must that be? And what would that do to us? And how can we do anything but be empathetic and try to connect? Then there's a question of, how do we teach? The top priority: we need to listen deeply to the stories of teachers, school counselors, principals, families, and students. If you go to the New York Times podcast called The Daily from June 12th, 2020, you'll hear a podcast called The Struggle to Teach from Afar. And that's Rhonda McIntyre's classroom that she's talking about. At first, the struggle she went through to teach at a distance, to teach remotely, and how hard it was for her to work with not just the average student, especially the special needs student, but really all of her students, to connect with them. How are they? What's going on with them? How can we teach the subject matter if they're in a state of crisis? How do we get them to work with their parents who may have no experience as teachers? My guess is many of you who are listening to this webinar now have experience with this frustration, this anxiety. You want to do the best you can, but looking out in the wide world, the students who you're working with, do they have broadband internet connection? Is there a device for each student? Are there parents or loved ones or adults of some sort who can help coordinate all of this? And the answer too often is no, there's not. So let's say we go back to the classroom, but are we really going back to the classroom as it was? Here's a picture that represents a wonderful elementary school classroom like Rhonda's classroom. But if you look at it, all the things that make it so great, the books that are stacked close together, the chairs that are so close together, all the places that young people can congregate to work as teams on problem solving, the rug that everybody sits around in the elementary school to listen to stories or to share ideas, to build problem solving skills in all the subject matter areas. Are those really available now in an area of social distancing? And the answer is no. So it not only required great teachers to rethink on the fly with almost no time and very little training to go from ink person teaching in, say, February and early March to being remote teachers, and now to rethink again in a situation where sometimes it's remote, sometimes it's hybrid, and sometimes it's in person. And when it is in person, it's got to be a completely different classroom geography than the one that we've been so correctly advocating now because of health concerns, very valid health concerns. So even the very best teachers, and maybe particularly the very best teachers, have a struggle on their hands that is serious and important for us to understand. How will we assess our students' content learning and emotional health? This is a super important question. We've been standardized testing for so long. We have clear expectations of what we need to accomplish, not just to cover, but to assess to see, did it really happen? And yet we're at a time when faculty is under a lot of stress. You yourselves as school leaders are under a lot of stress, the families, the students. I've been telling people who've been asking me, really, what can we expect? And my answer is, we need to always expect the best, but the best right now isn't what it used to be. People are tired. They've gone through a lot. This includes students and their families. That's one tension. On the other hand, what makes this a real dilemma, we're pushed, pressed, and expected to reach a certain level of success in terms of learning outcomes. We have content knowledge that's important, but how about the emotional health of our young people? To me, we have to have both, but right now I would prioritize the emotional health of our young people. As we look at the second bullet point here, curriculum, instruction, and assessment are interconnected. What that means is curriculum, the learning agenda; instruction, how we share the learning agenda; and assessment, how we see how people have progressed along the lines of the learning agenda. If we change one, we change them all because they're interrelated. So if we change what we expect because things are so tough, we've got to reorganize instruction. We have to do that anyway because of the things I just mentioned about the classroom changing, distance learning, the hybrid, et cetera, and the curriculum. So this is requiring on the fly some significant alterations in the learning agenda, how we share the learning agenda, and how we assess progress along the lines of the learning agenda. So there's a big challenge ahead of us. We're in the midst of it, and there's emotional sides and emotional costs to it, how we handle it. And your role as school leaders is one of critical importance in terms of being supportive and understanding and guiding and leading, but as a team, not, in my opinion, not as a top-down sort of leader. And actually not as a heroic leader, but as a team leader. And asking for leadership among the faculty, leadership for students, and leadership for families and communities so that we can come together and work through this. Huge question. How should we support healthy community within and beyond the school? Healthy, literally, quite literally, a healthy community, but also a community sense that we're all in this together, that we all have a part of leadership that we each own, so that you don't come home saying, oh my goodness, it's all on my shoulders. It's asking too much of yourselves. Same thing, the teacher shouldn't feel that way. We all need to own it. So we have to sort of redefine our roles, in my opinion. So here's some advice that I got from some of the finest school counselors that I know. Here are 3 pieces that I'd like to share with you. First, it's critical to build a sense of community within and beyond the school and its communities. If you've been doing this all along, now is the time to benefit from all the good work that you've done. So you have relationships, so that it's not a question like if something happens that's hard, it's when something happens that's hard. They will be there because they know you. It's never too early and it's never too late to start. But certainly with the heightened turbulence of the pandemic and the search and struggle for racial justice and equity, what we're facing is if we've built those relationships with the community, the support will be there and life will be easier. If we have not, it's certainly time to start now, because what we're going through now, I hope it never comes back again, the pandemic, but you can bet that there will be turbulence ahead of you in your careers. So start now if you haven't. Build upon what you have if you have. Second point, how might we redefine community safety, including transcending school safety? What does it mean for school resource officers to do their jobs? How might this confront the school to prison pipeline? What is meant by safety? A healthy community, what is meant by that? Where we share and we work together, where we understand each other, where we work as families together, where we know one another. It's time to open up that question. I'm sure you've been working on it, but it's time to redouble our efforts to work on it even more seriously. And the third point that the guidance counselors told me and the school counselors told me, families are missing out on counseling services. How can teachers and school leaders communicate with families who may be more stressed than ever? How can we support the people there? Not just the ones who we see on back to school night, but maybe especially the ones who we never get to see on back to school night. How can we be more supportive so that they in turn can support the learners who are living with them, their children? So it's a time to sort of redefine what it means to be a leader in many cases, or at least broaden our interpretation of what it means to be a school leader. By doing this, it means broadening and sharing leadership responsibilities so that you can guide but not own everything, so that you can share and that others will share back with you. Now, application through guided practice. We're going to try out a case. This is, as I said, a habit of mind. It would be great if you could work with colleagues on this, because I'm suggesting that when you're dealing with heightened turbulence, you're never really doing it by yourself. You're doing it as a team. And this means a team of colleagues, maybe fellow teachers, maybe fellow administrators, maybe a cross section of school professionals. And as you work together as a team, you learn this habit of mind as a team, and then you go on and be able to practice it properly. So what I want you to do over the next few minutes, over the next few slides, is to pause and read the case thoroughly. And you also find it in the participant's guide. If you don't want to read it on the screen, that's fine. The title is Rolling Enrollment, or How We Learn to Start Worrying and Fearing Layoffs by Arcady Yellman. So please take some time and read through this case, and I'll catch up with you on the other side. Now that you've read the case, let's apply the 5-step process. This is the process that I shared with you in part 1 of this webinar. Remember the game plan. 5 steps to put turbulence theory to work. Step 1, and we'll work through this step by step. I'll be with you in this guided practice. Reflect deeply on the turbulence facing this principal and his school. Step 2, consider the drivers of turbulence: positionality, cascading, and stability. We're going to do this sequentially and systematically so that you get a sense of how to work with your own case, which is what's going to come up as the last part of this webinar. Step 3, decide on a general level of turbulence. How turbulent are things in general? Light, moderate, severe, or extreme. 4, consider whether the principal should escalate or turn down the turbulence. And 5, make a plan that this principal might follow. So you might consider yourself and your colleagues right now the consultants to this school and this principal. So step 1, reflecting deeply on the turbulence facing this principal and the school. This is a time to write down ideas. This is what I said in the first part of the webinar, just like this team of people is doing. Consult, but I would say before you start talking, take a few minutes and jot down everything you remember from the case, all of the tensions that you see, all of the problems, all of the concerns, how serious this is in your opinion. Then when you can sit down and reflect on your notes and then on the notes of your colleagues, it's time to say, do we see things together in a similar way? Or are we seeing differences? Where's the overlap in that kind of Venn diagram of ideas? Now is the time to build up our understanding of the case, and you need different perspectives that will come if you've written and you've shared in that way. Please don't rush for consensus. If you've got a point that's really critical, that you feel is terribly important, fight for its inclusion, because you could be the person with the insight that really matters at the end. The second step, after you've considered the case seriously, is to look at the 3 drivers that we talked about in the first part of this webinar: positionality, stability, and cascading. In terms of positionality, as you look on this case, are people in the case seeing the situation in similar ways, or are there factions? If you recall this turbulent tensions Pentagon model, it might give you some insights. We have a little bit of information from central office, but we have a lot of information about the principal in this case and about teachers in this case. And as we saw in the first part of this webinar, principals are on this continuum of, are they going to be democratic and ethical leaders, sort of leading the school in that way, or are they traditional kind of leaders working strictly within the hierarchy of their organizations? And teachers, their sense of individual agency or conformity, those are the patterns that they're working from. How does that play itself out in terms of what you see in terms of behaviors of the principal on the one hand and teachers on the other hand? Also, You want to keep in mind that this school is going through the same security, economics, environment, and technology context that everybody else is. So when you are thinking about positionality in this case, what different groups seem to exist in the case? Now, there are groups that we hear about in the case, and there are groups that go unnamed. But of course, there are students that are going to be involved. There are families that are going to be involved. Teachers certainly are mentioned and discussed. The principal is discussed, and you can imagine the hierarchy coming down on this principal with certain demands, how that makes that person feel very much in the middle of an increasingly turbulent situation. Think of the different demographics that might exist. We don't have that much information here, but you can imagine in a typical school setting what demographic differences might exist and what might they have to do with how the situation is playing itself out. And what do we know about individual situations? Well, we know about the principal's situation, that's for sure. And now, with the information that you have just from the case, and I realize it's not complete, but it gives you enough to work on this problem. Let's see. Do we have a case of light turbulence in terms of positionality? Do most people seem to be seeing the situation in the same way? Is it getting moderate, where there's 2 or 3 factions that seem to be forming? And who would they be, those factions? Severe. Multiple factions are moving towards action. Or critical. Critical differences in extreme turbulence. Critical differences among factions are refining the school and community. New alliance patterns seem likely. Now, the second of the drivers, cascading. Are things calm, or are multiple forces pushing up a feeling of turbulence in this school? When you reflect on cascading, ask yourself these questions. To what extent are chronic external and internal conditions having an impact on the organization? In what ways are typical periodic external internal conditions having an enhanced impact on this organization? And how are new flare-up external internal conditions having an impact on this organization? In other words, as you look at the forces that are making for turbulence, are they things that are happening regularly and there's ongoing issues? Is it something that's happening periodically, once a calendar year, once every few months? Or is it something that just flared right up? And again, in the background of all this, for all of us in our schools right now, we have the pandemic, and we also have the issue of the search for racial equity. As you think through those questions, it's time to look at the cascading turbulence gauge. Where are we? Do we have light turbulence where there is calmness and little sign of new conditions complicating the situation? In terms of cascading, is it moderate? 2 or 3 conditions are interacting to accelerate the situation. Is it severe, where multiple forces propel the situation as it gains momentum? Or is it extreme, a torrent of forces sweeping away almost all issues as the current order seems destined to transform? Where are we? Fill that out, please. Third driver is stability. Is there a secure feeling about this school, or are things getting rocky? Reflect on stability by asking yourselves these questions. How has the current turbulence affected the school's reputation for effectiveness? In what way have current conditions impacted support from families and the wider community? And to what extent have current conditions altered the confidence of those who we directly report to at the building, district, regional, or state levels? Next, decide where the school is on the stability turbulence gauge. Is it light, a solid reputation for effectiveness supported by concrete evidence? Is it moderate? Cracks in the image of the organization are starting to show. Key groups are voicing their doubts. Is it severe? Trust from multiple directions has eroded. Key structures supporting the current organizational structure have weakened. Or is it extreme? Most stakeholders are expecting continued volatility. Personnel shifts are taking place. Challenges to the foundations of the current organizations are constant. Dynamic change is within sight. Where is this school, in this case, on the stability turbulence gauge? Clearly, and no case can give you enough information. Information is needed. We have some answers, and this is not just a problem, it's a wonderful opportunity, because in your case, when you're handling your own turbulent issues, you and your team need to do data collecting, because each of the 3 drivers, positionality, cascading, and stability, is powerful and will require you and your team to gather and monitor data regularly as you work with the heightened turbulence that you're experiencing. And in this way, what you're actually doing is launching yourselves and getting into an action research project that's tailored to your institution. It means in terms of whether it's positionality, cascading, or stability, there's a lot more information that you need to get. You can answer hypothetically to a certain extent. We believe this is what we know. Now, the question is next time we meet, please go out and find more information. Are we sure? Who have you talked to, etc.? You're immediately building up the data that you have in hand to be able to answer the questions from multiple points of view, from, I would say, a 360-degree circle of information. And that's critically important, very valuable, and will lead you to deeper, better, more sustainable answers. Okay, the third step, you've made your estimate of where things are in this case of positionality, cascading, and stability. Now take a step back and let's make the big picture. Adding all these up, in this case, do you see the general turbulence level as light, an ongoing issue with little disruption, moderate, widespread awareness of the issue, severe, threat to the current enterprise, or extreme, structural change likely, and you and your team need to make a decision? And again, this should be time for debate, discussion, some argument, and more than just passion, the marshaling of evidence and facts so that you're basing your opinion on facts and you're sharing those with other people so that you can come to a deeper understanding. You've set the turbulence level. Now you've got a decision to make. Should leaders at this school escalate or tone down the turbulence? As I said in the first part of the webinar, the instinct is almost always to tone down the turbulence. Sometimes the metaphor that people use is, I'm going to put out the little fire. But there are opportunities in actually escalating by looking at the drivers of positionality, cascading, and stability, dialing those up a bit to try something brand new. This school is in serious trouble. And it may be that the ways that they've gone about their business have not served them terribly well. So now is the time to be able to say, will we use innovation and will we use turbulence to actually push us towards innovation? Because where we are currently is not succeeding. We have serious problems. So it's a decision you and your team need to make. And that leads us to step 5, make a plan. A plan for this school. What direction should the principal go and how should he get there? My advice to you as you work through making a plan, and my advice in this case would be finding out ways, and you might want to discuss and brainstorm ways in this case how this could happen, to build the plan, not just sell the plan. In other words, with the input that you've got, with the data collecting you've got, you're going to be hearing from a lot of perspectives. You get an idea of what kind of plan are people interested in. Ask people their opinions. Honor them by speaking with them. I spoke earlier about the need for democracy. Well, the schools are the people's schools, our public school system. And that means we should be listening constantly to opinions that make us feel great because they seem to validate us and resonate with us and all. But we also need to listen to other voices which are challenging to us. And we need to welcome them all because the school belongs to all of us in our community. And that means the plan needs to reflect the ideas of families, faculty, administration, students, and the wider community. And we should remember, and we would encourage, if we were the consultants to this principal in this case study, that turbulence is a movie, not a snapshot. And what that means is our deliberations are starting us on a process. And the process means we got to go back again to say, where are we on the case? What do the drivers seem to be doing? What general level of turbulence do we have? Shall we raise it? Shall we lower it? Okay, all of those steps. Have we built the plan? Does it still reflect the community's ideas? And review this periodically because these systems are very much in movement. They're in flux. Because that's the case, we need to not be rigid, not be too linear, but be flexible. And that is why learning how to work with turbulence means learning how to work with a new habit of mind, being open, being flexible, being accepting of change as constant. That's what it means to work with the turbulence. How should this principal monitor the situation? So with those ideas in mind that I've just shared with you, what would you expect the principal to do? What would you invite her or him to do and hope that they would follow up as good consultants that you are? Now for independent practice. If you remember the very beginning of the first part of this webinar, I asked you to think of the most turbulent thing that has happened to you in the last 4 months. Use the 5-step process to respond to your own experience with turbulence. Share your analysis with colleagues to compare and contrast your take on the situation. So please pause the webinar and respond to this now. If you would like to get started with it at this point, that's great. If you want to then get started and then go into great detail I encourage that. Again, it's like you're starting practice with a new instrument. No one is exceptional on any instrument on day one or day three or day five. By practicing, by getting it internalized to ourselves as a person and as a professional and as a professional community of practice, we can learn a new habit of mind that will, I believe, serve all of us well dealing with turbulence. So in this section, what I've tried to do is to share with you the opportunities and the lessons and the concerns that we should have as we are in the season of the pandemic and the search and struggle for racial equity, and what this means in terms of our trying to see the world from a different place than we ourselves live in sometimes, trying to share and empathize more deeply than we ever have, to be able to say that the raising the next level of students, the next generation of students, to be able to handle and improve upon our democracy is critical. It's really job one. Nothing matters if we were to lose our democracy, in my opinion. What it means to be empathetic to our teachers, what they're going through as teaching in new ways, in challenging ways, and how can we support them being the best educators and professionals that they can be under circumstances that, oh my goodness, 1 year ago, we never would have imagined, but here we are. An application, the idea of working through that case and then asking you to go back to your case. I must tell you that I'm optimistic, and given all the challenges that I've shared in both part one and part two of this webinar, you might wonder how that can be. Because I believe that we can learn new approaches. Turbulence theory and working with it is one such case, I believe. And what that means is that we can adapt, we can change, we can learn, we can grow. And don't forget, there are a lot of eyes on yourselves as educational leaders. How you model what you want other people to do really matters. This is not just a case where you can inspire confidence and inspire a new level of professionalism for yourself, but it in turn will engender a new level of professionalism for all those who work with you. So I see this as a challenge, of course, pressure, no doubt, but also a critical opportunity that you may only see once in a whole career. I also realize that there's fear in the air. And here's my parting thought in terms of turbulence and fear. And it's a quote from one of my heroes, and that's Eleanor Roosevelt, First Lady of the United States, from 1933 to 1945. She said, "The answer to fear is not to cower and hide. It is not to surrender feebly without contest. The answer is to stand and face it boldly, look at it, analyze it, and in the end, act." Here's some helpful resources that I've shared with you that I hope help you. Please understand that you are a valued member of a wonderful profession of educators. I have the great honor of being in that organization too, among yourselves. You have great heroes. You can be one of those, not through a heroic leadership, but by working with colleagues. I know that we can get through where we are now and come out the other side having gone through a lot, but having learned a lot, having learned how to be an educator in possibly a deeper and more profound way than we ever imagined. I wish you all the best in solidarity and empathy. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
The Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement would like to thank you for participating in the Leadership Preparation virtual webinar series. We hope you found this particular webinar informative and beneficial to your work as you prepare as a leader. To access the webinar series and find additional resources, please visit the Maryland Resource Hub. The Maryland Resource Hub can be located at marylandresourcehub.com. That is MarylandResourcehub.com. We appreciate your feedback and would ask that you take a moment at this time to complete the SurveyMonkey link or use the QR code. The feedback that you provide to us will inform our work in the office as we develop additional resources to support you in the field. Again, thank you very much for your time in completing the feedback. As a reminder, the continuing professional development credits are available to you for this Leadership Preparation webinar series. To receive 1 credit, you will need to view 5 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience for the webinar. That would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar, and completing the participant's guide, as well as extension activities related to the webinar. To receive 2 CPD credits, you will watch all 10 webinars, parts 1 and 2, and complete 3 hours of experience per webinar. Again, it would include the pre-work, viewing the webinar and completing the participant's guide while watching, and extension activities related to the webinar. After you have completed the work, you will then submit all of the materials to the Google Form link listed. If you need to contact us with any questions for any reason at the Office of Leadership Development and School Improvement, you can contact Ed Mitzel, Executive Director, at edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov. That is edmund.mitzel@maryland.gov. Or Dr. Lori Ellis, Coordinator for Leadership Development, at lori.ellis@maryland.gov. That is lori.ellis@maryland.gov.